Okay, so welcome to part two of this particular topic. It had to go to part two because the rain came and KPLC did what they do best. Wakaanua stima. Ni sawa, tumezoea. So I had I had explained this already. So I won't go through it again. This next slide is also explaining most of the things that I've already mentioned. You can go through it. You can pause and go through it if you want, but I'm not going to go through it again. And here now, we want to take care of the required fields. Required fields. So these are fields that cannot be empty and must be filled out before submitting the form. So like we have the name, we have the email address, and we have the gender. They must be filled out. So in the following code, we are going to introduce some new variables. Name error for holding the error associated with the name, email error for holding any error associated with the email, and gender there, and website respectively. We are also going to check if the post variable is empty using a PHP function called the empty function. If it is empty, we are going to store the error message on the error variable. Okay, so let's see how the code is gonna look like after that. So we just introduced this. We just introduced these variables for holding the errors. Then here we're checking if the form has been submitted. Then this is the code for one variable. This is the code for another variable. This is the code for another variable. This one here for another one. And this one lastly here. So here we are first checking is the name available. If it's not available, we save it. We save the error in the variable name error, and the error reads name is required. Else, we call the test input function to validate the name that has been entered. So next, we're doing the same thing for the email. So email is also required. For the website, if it's empty, we just assign it to an empty string, the website variable to an empty string, similarly to the comment. But for the gender, you must have selected. If it's empty, you're going to be told that the gender is required. So that's how we're capturing errors here. You remember in our practical class, we used an error array for that, but this is the other way in which you can do it. Now, in order to display the error messages, then in the HTML form, we will need to add a little script just after each form element that is required in order to generate the correct error message that is needed when the error occurs. So again, we did this in the practical. So in HTML, for example, after the name text field, then we have a span class error, then we are echoing the error. So if we have some value there, it's gonna show. Similarly here, we are adding that. and here we are adding that, and here we are adding this. So that's the only thing that we've added to the form. Okay, and then to validate the name, you remember the requirement was that the name should have text and should not contain white spaces. So should have only letters and no white spaces. So if the value of the name field is not valid, then store an error message. So to do that, we already met the preg match PHP function. So preg match PHP function takes in two parameters: the characters that you allow, in that variable, and the variable itself. So the name should only contain letter A to Z or capital A to Z. Just that. So here we are negating. So if it contains only A to Z and caps A to Z, then it's gonna return true. So we are negating using the not operator. So if it's not true, so if we negate, so if that is not true, then we are going to save the error. Only letters and white spaces. Only letters and white spaces are allowed. Oh, here is the white space. I'm sorry, I didn't show it. This one here. So white space. Anything between this. Sorry. Anything between that and this is allowed in the preg match. Okay. So validating the email, again, here we use the filter var function. Filter var. So here's the filter var function. We give it the user input and we use this filter validate email parameter. So again, we are negating so that if it's not correct, we save that error message. We can also validate the URL. To validate the URL, again, we use the preg match. We use the preg match function. So good thing is that you really don't have to cram some of these things. You can always search them and use them. So I don't expect you to cram this preg match value. Just too much for one person. I won't ask you about this. I can't be that evil. So don't even try to cram it. But it just means that a valid URL should have maybe HTTPS or FTP. You should have www followed by a dot, followed by either characters A to Z or 0 to 9, and at hash etc, and all these other characters. And of course, you give it what the user has entered. So again, we are negating using the not, so that if it's not correct, then we save the error message invalid URL. Okay, so now when we do that, our script will now look like this. You see, we have the script for the name here. So first, we check if the name is entered or not using the empty. So if it's not entered, then we save that. Otherwise, we want to do something else. So we want to validate the name. So we call the test input function. Then after validating the name, we want to check if the name matches our requirement. So we use the preg match. Similarly for the email, We do that. Check whether it's empty. Then if it's not empty, we validate it. Then after validating it, we check whether it's a it's an email. This first part is not validating but sanitizing. We sanitize. Remove any HTML special characters